Hello everyone, welcome back to the Internally Screening Podcast. We are back after a long absence with this format because honestly, we're terrible at timekeeping, and that's fine because we've found something that is a timeless concept. We are going back in this new series on the podcast to every single Oscar Best Picture winner ever since the awards first began, and just trying to pick apart like what made these brilliant or successful films the brilliant successful films that they are, and sometimes going into the less successful, the kind of
the weird ones,
the crashes and the like, the green books.
I wouldn't call them successful or fantastic, I'd call them just award winning.
Right, exactly. Successful only by that merit.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just thought it'd be interesting because, I think it's kind of fun to pick apart the history of film to a certain degree. And, there's certain films in this list that have kind of been forgotten about. And, there are going to be ones like within this video that many, many people know about. And then there are going to be others that people are far less aware of. And it's just going to be a little bit of fun comparing and contrasting some of these films.
Yeah, well, we are doing it on a spin wheel, and we did do two. We did get two that definitely haven't been forgotten about. Because the first one we're doing is The Apartment, which I had seen, you hadn't seen.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always saying that.
Okay.
Not as a shot. Not as a shot. I don't know if that's good on me or you. It's just
okay.
like I'm such a fucking nerd. It's a Billy Wilder film, Jack Lemmon, and what was the woman called again? The woman was called Shirley MacLaine.
Yeah.
Which is it's sort of like a rom-com from the 60s. It won in 1960, and it's a bit of it's probably the second most beloved Billy Wilder film after Something Like It Hot.
Yeah.
Though I think it's actually better than Something Like It Hot. As much as I do love Something Like It Hot, I think this is probably the best. Definitely. I'd definitely say The Apartment is the best Billy Wilder film that I've seen. I haven't seen all of them, but yeah.
I have only seen this and Some Like It Hot, and I love them both. I think they're both fantastic.
I've seen this, Some Like It Hot, and I've seen All About Eve, and I think I've seen one other one, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I've seen Sunset Boulevard, which is awesome, actually. Oh, and Double Indemnity, also awesome.
Oh, of course, I forgot you did that.
Oh, is All About Eve not... Oh, ignore me. All About Eve isn't even Billy Wilder, so ignore me there. But I thought it was, and you'd forgive me for thinking it was if you've seen it.
Okay.
But yeah, those are all. And I've seen Witness for the Prosecution. Yeah, okay, he's done. Yeah, I mean, he's a great director. This is very different to something like Double Indemnity, I guess. Although it does have that romance element to it, but it is basically a rom-com.
Yeah.
And I love it because I think it's basically like the thing that rom-coms these days I think are really sorely missing is really, really good writing.
Yeah.
And like this film is like so well written, and it's just so clever and like actually funny. It's romantic and a comedy.
Yeah.
Which sounds so obvious, but
yeah, I think it sets up like crucially it sets up a really interesting premise for all of it to sort of orbit around.
A risque premise as well.
A risque premise, especially for the time, and it's just a very a kind of unique one I've not come across even since, really.
Right,
and not that I find myself often watching rom-coms, but that's normally for the modern cliche that rom-coms have kind of lost their impact, their kind of cultural acclaim, and so why would I want to watch
They're sort of
one?
seen as I think the most disposable kind of film that you get. Like they all have the same poster, which is like a white background with like two people looking longingly into each other's eyes, or if it's like, or they're sort of stood back to back.
Yeah, like a bit kooky.
Looking a bit sassy.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way, and it's sort of like when an actor's given up.
Or an actor's trying to break in.
Yeah, but you want all the other.
You see like, that early Matthew McConaughey, Ryan Reynolds,
Yeah, but there's others like Johnny Depp and Jack Black where they've just sort of like,
you know what?
I'll just do one of these for the money. Whereas, I guess so. The premise of The Apartment, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is you have Jack Lemmon who plays a sort of put upon corporate man who diligently is just doing his job. He's just a regular guy. He's trying to make it, and he really wants success, but he's sort of found himself in this weird situation where his higher ups, who are all sort of sleazy, disgusting corporate pigs, who are all obviously having affairs, multiple affairs.
Yeah.
Want a place to shag that won't arouse much suspicion. They want to have their affairs in a sort of nice, sort of contained environment, I guess. And there's this weird situation has arisen where they use his apartment to have their affairs. Yeah, as the Netflix and chill spot. Which I think this is during the code, so quite a risque, sort of edgy thing for the time, I imagine.
Yeah. This must have been pushing the boundaries, and you can kind of feel that within the film.
Yeah.
It's a lot skirting very close to a line, and it never quite crosses it. Yeah, never quite shows anything.
Doesn't feel like
but
it's
it implies so much.
It never feels like it's copping out.
No, not at all.
Because there's a lot of Hays Code stuff you can watch where it's like the classic example is the Hitchcock North by Northwest.
Okay.
Where they're about to make love, and you see the train going into the tunnel.
Oh, of course.
I think that's North by Northwest. So
I see.
So you get sort of like stuff like that. But in this one, there's a lot of kind of it feels very real.
Yeah.
Even though it's sort of got that affected, like kind of quirky, sort of very written 60s dialogue that's very snappy and it still has that sort of sense of realism to it in the way that it's just the whole thing feels very believable.
Yeah. Thinking about how risque it feels, I wonder if the get around is how voyeuristic the film feels, because it's centered around Jack Lemmon, who is a man that's always on the outside looking into all of these love stories, and when he falls in love, he also finds himself on the outside looking in on a kind of he doesn't know quite the machinations exactly of the relationship, but he knows he's not part of it. He knows he's like a secondary figure, and so maybe like that kind of space between that the sort of physical romance and the longing for romance is how the film is able to get away with so much in terms of its risque humor.
I mean, you get some of the risque stuff like he pops the champagne bottle and
that's a classic.
Like, you get stuff like that, but
classic.
For the most part, it is the kind of film you could watch with your parents, because it's kind of that like almost like it's a bit naughty, but it's not like that bad. You could watch it with your grandparents even, and it's just kind of quite. It has that sort of wholesome quality to it. But I think another thing that I've seen a lot of, not a lot, but I've seen a fair amount of modern romantic comedies, and one thing I really dislike about a lot of them is the like inserted pathos that you get, like where it's like, oh, we're at the end of the film, they fall out.
Oh, I see. Right,
I mean?
you have to have this moment where everything goes wrong.
I can't think of an example off the top of my head.
But it's a classic trope.
Yeah, it's always like
it's like you have to have your point in the second act where everything goes to shit, the two characters fall out. Yeah. I mean, it happens in far more than just rom-coms.
Yes,
in many films, it's you kind of anticipate that moment, and anytime that does happen, you kind of roll your eyes a little bit.
It feels very manufactured sometimes. It can, obviously, you can do that trope, and it can be fine.
Absolutely.
As long as the story is like actually sort of going that way. It's when it feels quite inserted, right?
Yeah, it becomes a crutch for a lot of writers who don't really know where they're going.
I saw the film Friends with Benefits once, and I remember like something happened like around that, and I was just like, oh, fuck off. Like,
you checked out.
Yeah, I was just like, this is just silly. But whereas in this, it doesn't just have that moment, but does it really well. It has like other subtler moments. Like I really love the scene in the office party. She's just found out the lady, the elevator girl that Jack Lemmon's fallen in love with. She's just found out that the boss who she's sort of in love with, who is having an affair with her, has been sort of just routinely doing this to loads of girls, and she's very downcast, and Jack Lemmon doesn't really pick up on it, but he's very chipper because he's just been promoted to his new office. And what I love about this is this kind of like unspoken dynamic, and it changes because he takes her to the office and she's really happy, and then she sees the broken mirror on the desk and like picks it up and goes, "Oh, that's mine. I don't know."
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And Jack Lemmon clocks what's been going on.
Because it was left at his apartment.
He didn't realise that she was in with the boss.
Yeah.
So then suddenly he's downcast and she doesn't know.
Yes.
And that's really clever writing.
Yeah.
Like you so rarely get films of like the quality to pull that kind of stuff
Yeah,
off.
yeah. And what's interesting about it is it's a fairly simplistic concept,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's got to be handled. It's got to have a deft hand sculpting it. Otherwise, yeah, you just kind of end up in like very tropey dialogue. Often I find that these sorts of films,
unspoken. Do you know what I mean?
these sorts of films I find are often very hand-holding. They sort of talk you through all of the characters' motivations, and this is what I'm feeling right now, and I need to pour my heart out. And there's always this kind of like tertiary character that they just blurt out. Yeah, narration. So it's someone that they can blurt out their inner monologue to. And in this, you don't have that. You get it far more through the physical acting and just like the.
I mean, it certainly helps. The acting. The thing that makes that scene is that the acting is so good.
Yes.
Because Jack Lemmon is just really funny.
Yeah.
Does a great job of just sort of being a funny, plucky guy, but also, has that moment where he sort of switches. It is quite sad. It has that real sadness to it. And she's, I forget her name immediately, but she's also like very good. Completely like all of the acting is good. That makes that's what kind of elevates the script as well, because I guess that's another classic thing, like a lot of modern rom-coms, you don't get brilliant acting because you sort of get this more improvisational style, like that, a lot of influence from those sort of Will Ferrell,
like the Judd Apatow films,
type comedies, whereas this is like very scripted. It's like very precise.
I guess maybe it's that there's a kind of distaste for the rom-com in Hollywood, that it is seen as like a second-rate production, that the big actors all want to do their serious dramas or like grand franchise or action films or something where they get to like put their name to and be like
wax lyrical.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Do you reckon this might have been the last rom-com to win Best Picture?
I would be intrigued to see. Yeah. I mean, what's fascinating to me is kind of going back in time and seeing an era in which the rom-com wasn't a dirty word. It wasn't it wasn't seen as a second-class film. Like, you could really create something quite beautiful out of it.
Well, it was almost sort of like the mode. Like, there were a lot of classic, like All About Eve is sort of a little bit like a rom-com as well, and Some Like It Hot as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oh,
so
that's
like,
fantastic.
Yeah, those are great films. I guess it just takes a great director. So like Billy Wilder was just kind of, I mean, he did noir stuff as well, but like those two films are like probably two of the best rom-coms out there.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't think of many that even really come close to them.
I mean, and I guess that's kind of part of the purpose of a series like this, is kind of having that opportunity to like sort of laser focus on like what were people like talking about, what was the zeitgeist of particular years. And it's fascinating to return to 1960 and discover that this was still held in such high regard. Going back to what you were saying earlier though, like about that the dynamic in that specific scene, there's a kind of that mirrors a dynamic that you find in the whole film of Jack Lemmon's character using the corporate ladder and kind of essentially taking advantage vicariously of the women that the bosses are taking advantage of to increase his station in a corporate field. And at the same time he's doing that, we see the representation from, is it Shirley MacLaine? Yeah. Shirley MacLaine's character, who is having the opposite trajectory, where she's on a kind of downward spiral, sort of being manipulated through false promises and like, of a burgeoning or a rekindled romance that's actually just completely falsified and like he's just stringing her along. And that kind of critical moment of the film at the end is Jack Lemmon's character abandoning that principle, saying, "Fuck off! You can keep your money. I'm not abandoning my principles anymore." And I think that's and I like that at the end we don't have this sort of super gooey like, oh, they run off into the sunset. A film it kind of more reminds me of in a weird way is Ed Wood, where the end of the film, it's not a perfect mirror by any means, but what I mean is you kind of have two films where rather than get this super sentimental like running into one another's arms, you get that kind of atmosphere, but what they're doing is kind of mundane and kind of ordinary, or like, and in being so is kind of almost more romantic to me because it feels so much more grounded in the real world. Like they're sat at the end playing like cards together and just smiling at one another, and like there's a companionship they found. And in the same way at Ed Wood, it's like it doesn't matter that you failed because we'll go off and we'll have a fun life together. And it's, you know,
it's not like mega dramatic, but it does make the situation quite dramatic because it's sort of like the premise is that there's a brief period where she thinks he's killed himself because he like pops the champagne. So, and he talked about how he shot himself before, right?
Oh yes, so
sorry, they do have that brief sort of moment of tension. But yeah, it is. I guess it is sort of. I sort of agree, but at the same time, it is sort of like that classic ending. You know, that classic rom-com ending. You know, is they all live happily ever after in the end.
It is, but what I'm saying is that they do it in like
kissing in the rain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a certain kind of subtlety to it that I respected because it just kind of felt
more homely.
Yeah, and it felt more grounded. But you know what? It could be influenced again by the Hays Code of just like maybe he wanted something more grand and flamboyant as a gesture at the end, and he wasn't allowed to achieve that because it would have been too lewd for the senses.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, the film never really gets very lewd, but it does. I just think a lot of the comedy in it just works really well as well because like Jack Lemmon's like his like comedic style is like so well suited, and like it's got a lot of like sort of fun like 60s observational humour of like, you know, he's watching the TV show and like the adverts that keep coming on. It's like, oh fuck this, like and I like a lot of that stuff because it's like it's obviously quite quaint now, but you watch it and it's like
it's a little window.
It's like a window, but like, you know, you can also relate to it. It's like, you know, now when you're watching YouTube, it's like fucking another 15 second
the more things change, the more things stay the same.
Yeah, I do enjoy that. It's like a little time capsule. Although this is 1960, so there was colour film. I wonder if this is. I'm not sure when the film is set.
Is it deliberately kind of pastiche? I think it's set. I think it's set at that time. I think they mentioned late 50s, so it's like set just a couple years before. But I think it's supposed to kind of lead into the modern era, like he's building his career into it.
You know what I think this has that also a lot of romantic comedies don't have is that a lot of romantic comedies are worse off for not having is a great antagonist as well in the boss. Because I think he is the guy who plays him is excellent. Yeah, and he has some great scenes as well. Like I love the scene where they're in the Chinese restaurant, and he's sort of like toying with her emotions again, just because he's just so villainous. I don't know. And the scene like where he's at Christmas with his family, he's just like super slimy. And then like in the end where you sort of like, oh, you think like Jack Lemmon's going to be screwed because he actually does break up with his wife, and they're in the like they're in the New Year's thing, and he's like, you know, he's actually divorced his wife, and he's with Shirley MacLaine or whatever it is, and they're like sat there. I just think his presence. And also, you know, obviously the scene where Jack Lemmon like tells him to fuck off. I just think he's a good character. Like, and he seems very believable.
Yeah, no, I like him because he's not dressed up as like super Machiavellian or like
he's just a
heightened. He's just a slimy corporate man that's so used to people saying yes to him, and so used to sort of using his sort of business tactics in like a home setting where he's like he can manipulate anyone he wants for anything he wants, and it's just so second nature to him that he almost doesn't see it as a negative. It's just like it's just obvious to him, and like I think that's what makes him such like an insidious character, because he can be so polite and charming, and that's how he's gotten to where he is. He's never too bullish.
It just feels more believable. It's more viable. Like it feels like, you know, you've met that guy before.
100%.
So I guess another thing that rom-coms are obviously really good for is, you know, in theory, it should be like, you know, one of the most appealing genres out there, and that's why they're often so maybe like lowest common denominator, because everybody, you know, enjoys comedy. And, you know, everybody, you know, in their life at some point experiences romance, so there's a sort of level of relatability. So, which, you know, you might not get from an action film or a horror film. So, like the concept of a romantic comedy, just because it's lowest common denominator doesn't mean it all has to just be like garbage.
I agree.
And I hope that maybe one day we will see another rom-com win at the Oscars, but I don't think because like. I always say like, oh, I don't really like rom-coms. I do like them.
Yeah.
I just don't see any good ones.
No, I know what you mean.
And Love Actually fucking sucks.
Just got to get that in there.
Just had to do that.
Just got to
Fuck Love Actually.
What's the guy that did that? Richard.
What's his name? The guy who writes everything as well. He did About Time, which was also ridiculously overrated.
I think that guy was involved in Blackadder.
I think he wrote it. Richard Curtis.
Is he involved in Blackadder? Because I think he's done good stuff in comedy, and then he went on to write...
He's not like an untalented person.
He went on to write really sappy like rom-coms and
he just does like
stuff.
Bridget Jones and About
that time stuff.
Yeah,
did he do Bridget Jones?
He wrote it, I think.
Oh, damn.
Or like produced it, and he did The Boat That Rocked, which is like not a rom-com, but it's that kind of film.
It's like TV film type shit. Yeah. You know what I think with romantic comedies, and perhaps part of the pitfall that's happened with the form, the genre, is that because it's so relatable, there's kind of a finite way of telling that story, like a finite amount of ways. And often the straightest lane of telling that story is the one that's told, the format of someone struggling to find love.
Yeah.
Think they found love. It's unrequited. They fall out, or it's unrequited. Then they kind of get to a point where, oh, maybe this person really loves me. There's a misunderstanding, crucially. Yeah. Then they resolve the misunderstanding and they live happily ever after. There's always this kind of really rigid format, and it renders a lot of like, it seems to be that a lot of people just take that format and use it ad nauseum rather than kind of imbuing their own. You know
what? A lot of it, I think, is the problem in terms of like. I know we're going like, oh, these days everything's rubbish,
yes.
But I think a lot of the problems with romantic comedies now is it's sort of been typecast as a woman's film, right?
Okay,
and it's sort of, I think, a lot of people sort of see romantic comedies as just this sort of like
it's
inherently,
a chick flick,
like
right.
chick flick, right? It's sort of this disposable piece of crap.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do like, it's sort of like a vicious cycle because a lot of people consume them that way. It's like, oh, I'm feeling poorly, the classic stereotype, sit on the sofa crying to Bridget Jones's Diary and eat a tub of Ben and Cherries, like classic. But people do that, but like. This, for example, like, and a lot of blokes be like, "Oh, I wouldn't watch a rom-com, bloody for wusses," But like this, The Apartment is a film that I feel like I could show to any bloke and be like, this is relatable. This is like a great film. Yeah. Like, and I guess you don't often see like unisex sort of.
I guess the film
marketed. Like romantic comedies, right?
No, I suppose
the only one I can think of is that About Time film, which isn't like bad. I don't hate it.
Yeah, that's a decent film.
It's all right. Yeah. But like, and at least that's actually trying to like do something a bit different.
For sure. I mean? Yeah, whereas, that much I do respect about it.
Yeah. So like, it feels like maybe it's sort of this. What's it called? The bigotry of low expectations. It's like, women will just, watch this crap.
Oh,
I see. Need to really worry
so there's
about.
like a kind of partisanship that is formed around the genre.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. Because, like, it's not, people don't really, I mean, nowadays, and especially now with, like, Netflix, right?
Yeah.
It's just rom-coms, just like, just teenage girls, just chuck them.
It
doesn't need to be any good.
Yeah, but I suppose so. I guess the alternate for like men, it was just like sort of brainless action films, right?
Yeah, and there's plenty of that as well. And there's plenty the same thing.
Yeah, and there's plenty of dog shit action films out there as well. Yeah. So, and I guess action films as well don't really get their kind of critical flowers oftentimes.
Yeah, when was the last time an action film won Best Picture?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it does happen. You get like Lord of the Rings wins and things like that.
Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan, but it's not as maligned as a genre. For sure, but it definitely has that to it.
Yeah.
And I guess
think ultimately it's like probably most of the people voting the Oscars are blokes, right?
Probably.
And they're gonna, rom-coms are gonna sort of be lower regarded as a result, right? Yeah. So I think there is an element of that, but I mean, this is to me probably the best rom-com out there. I
mean, I would reserve judgment just in terms of. I will admit that I have, because of its like as a genre, its lower reputation.
Yeah.
I tend to watch less of them, but this is fantastic, and I hold this as a fantastic film beyond its rootings in its genre. I don't think we've given.
It's just objectively a great drama.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think we've given Jack Lemmon's quite enough credit for just how brilliant of a performance
So charming,
he
yeah.
has. Like, his characterization is so specific to him as an actor as well. You get echoes of it in his performance in Some Like It Hot. He has this incredibly charismatic quality to
likable.
him. He's just like, he could say nothing on the screen and you'd be drawn to him as this just charming figure.
Yeah.
And you know, it's
Great
a
physical comedy as well, like when he's ill at his desk and he's like moving all the stuff around on his desk.
yeah.
And he's like going through the flip book.
You definitely get a little flickers of Chaplin in what he's
or like,
doing.
you know, like late Jim Carrey type stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that must have... Oh, you know what? Yes, Jim Carrey must have completely been influenced by...
sure. Right.
Yeah, you know what? And there's a lot of facial acting he does. Like, he's got quite a rubbery face and he'll contort it into
he's got
sort
the thermometer
of
in his mouth.
emotional, like... Yeah, like Jim Carrey must have taken a lot from this guy. And, you know, character-wise, there is a certain... tropiness to him. He's like, oh, he's down on his luck, but he's plucky and he'll get his way.
The film sort of embraces that. Right?
The film embraces it and does something different with it and makes him specific. So
it's not for lack of depth either.
No.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing inherently wrong with a film running with a trope. It's about how it uses a trope.
Yeah.
And if it has something to say about that trope, and I think this film does, like this film, you know, this film takes a person in that state and gives him a backbone, gives him like moral courage where he didn't have any. He's got
a lot of depth to him, and he sort of changes a lot throughout the course of the film. And I also have to say, before we close out on this, I absolutely love the running gag that all of his neighbours think that he's an absolute shagger.
Yeah, that's
because they
great.
keep hearing like all the bosses come over with the women,
yeah.
but they either think it's him. And they just keep hearing it. Like, oh, he's at it again.
Yeah.
It's just like, and he's kept up the act to like cover for them. But you know, it's just it's a great sort of funny contrast thing. It always makes me laugh.
But I really like how it kind of reflects on his character, because like the more that joke escalates with like more happens in the film. So the joke gets funnier each time, but then it's like it hits this point of like, then he has to kind of make a moral choice of, does he keep backing these awful abusive people to save face? And he does. He makes that choice. But the more he seems to make that choice, the more he has resentment for the people he's making that choice for, and the more it influences his later decisions. So it's really interesting that they've tied that joke deeply rooted into like the skeleton of the film itself.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much like a film about, like, it's like a concept film almost. Like the whole thing is kind of about this one setup, and it's like they've taken that scenario and they've kind of worked backwards to make the film around that. And I think that's, you know, to its benefit, really. Yeah,
100%. So what would you rate it at the end of that?
It's like an 8 to a 9.
Oh, yeah.
8 to a 9. I really love it.
Yeah. No, I'm feeling an 8 as well. I absolutely adore this film, man. It says, you know, 1961, they nailed it with their Oscar awards. They found a banger. Yeah. Not that we've exhaustively watched every 1960s film. We should claim, you know, when we come to the end of this and we might go, oh yeah, they picked a banger. That doesn't necessarily mean they picked the very best film of that year. But if they picked a good film, I'm happy with that, because that is by no means a guarantee.
No way, yeah, for sure.
So the second film on the docket for today is The Pianist, the classic 2002 Holocaust film by the very talented but very problematic Roman Polanski, starring your boy Adrien Brody in an absolute career best performance. It is a very, you know, a classic film by this point that's, you know, no doubt had its flowers from every corner of the internet, but we're just going to chuck our hats into the ring to discuss it a little bit for you guys. Because, believe it or not, I had never seen this film before until recently. It was one of the black spots in my film knowledge. So it was it was just really great to fill that in and kind of, you know, I guess, you know, in terms of World War II films, there are a few blind spots I have. You know, I ain't seen Schindler's List. I ain't seen Saving Private Ryan. So,
oh my gosh,
you know, in terms of the World War II cinematic universe, I've got some black spots there. It's hard to almost think about what you can say about this film that hasn't already been said, but we're just going to do it anyway, because
number one,
why the hell not?
The funniest thing about this film is that Roman Polanski wasn't able to accept his award because he was in exile.
Yeah.
But he did get a standing ovation.
Which is cringe.
Which is very weird.
Yeah.
Hollywood is very weird about Roman Polanski. They want to, even like people I have almost unlimited respect for, like
Was it
Martin Scorsese signed that petition, like Patrick Stewart, like loads of great people.
People seem blinded by what he has given the movie world.
Yes.
To the fact that he did awful things.
Yeah.
And like, you can be both. You can have a legacy of amazing art and also have a legacy as being an awful human being.
Yeah, I mean, it's in my opinion, like a lot of the problems in the world, not to make it too broad, but come down to the concept that if people find it very difficult to process the idea that like something can be good and bad at the same time.
Yeah, there's a duality to the world.
Like,
it doesn't have to be specifically binary.
Two things can be true.
Yeah.
Roman Polanski is a paedophile who should probably come and face justice for breaking the law.
Yep.
And being a paedophile.
Yes.
And he could also be possibly one of the greatest living directors.
Yeah.
Ever. Whose work, even his late films, not all of them, some of them are terrible, but like The Ghostwriter.
Yeah,
it's like even something like that is like one of the best thrillers of that decade, in my opinion. So, he can be a paedophile and incredibly good at filmmaking.
Yeah,
and this is like a great example.
Exactly that. So, I mean, to start with, I think I was talking about Adrien Brody.
Yeah,
it cannot be denied.
He won Best Actor for this.
He did win Best Actor for this.
One of the youngest, or if not the youngest, man to win Best Actor at the time.
Right. And I think something I didn't expect about this film, I knew it was a Holocaust film, and that was basically all I knew. I didn't know the kind of how much focus was going to be specifically solely on him and his journey through war-torn Warsaw.
Yeah.
I had the misunderstanding that maybe he was going to be in one of the camps and found a way out or found a way to survive. So there's a point in this film where he's separated from his family, and it really becomes this like solo, just solely focusing on just one man's struggle, and like a lot of the film becomes kind of voiceless. Like it's very physical. It's very like there's like a gut wrenching tension, and like he's like bored. He's sort of pulled in so many different directions with what he goes through, and it never crossed my mind that he wasn't there doing those things and experiencing those things. I was entirely immersed in all of what he had to present.
Yeah, I mean, it is basically a flawless performance. I don't think there's any criticism I could offer Adrien Brody in this film. Like, it is basically perfect.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and like you say, a lot of it is like almost becomes a silent film at some points. Not literally because there's sound, but like
in terms of dialogue.
Yeah, like there's like a long portion, particularly sort of towards the end of the film, where it's literally just him in a room or him like walking around. Yeah, I don't think there's anything you could offer to criticise Adrien Brody in this film. It's basically completely perfect. And I do really like that, because I like that the film sort of has this sort of really jarring shift in perspective where you sort of get to know and I'm sort of glad that you didn't know that happened in the film. Yeah. Because it is sort of jarring that, so much of the family is sort of built up as characters. You're sort of, a lot of them, they're all very likeable, and, you're sort of rooting for them. And then, like, they're just gone.
And they never come back.
And they never come back.
You know what happens to them.
There's no closure, but you know.
Yeah, that's what's awful. And I guess there was a little bit of a history lesson for me within this film, because we all have knowledge of the basics around World War II, but I was surprised at how many gaps there were in my knowledge. Shamefully to say, but
Poland is almost sort of a more specific
example, I had no idea just how awful it was in Poland during the war, and how much worse your life expectancy was if you were a Jew in Warsaw than if you were in Berlin or something. Like that is absolute insanity, just like the relentless brutality of what went on. And the almost sort of unbelievable tenacity of a man like Adrien Brody's character to somehow survive any of that. Like that he scrapes
Spielman.
Spielman. And he seems to just avoid all of these insane situations.
You're watching it, and it's a very grim experience for his character, obviously, but the fucked up part is that he's the lucky one, right?
Exactly. That's it.
Because he is, throughout the film, catches a lot of breaks.
Yes.
That you see so many other Jewish characters in the film not catch.
Yeah. And there was an element to me, it was like, not that it was affecting my enjoyment of the film, but there's a kind of part of my brain in the back going, how is he surviving all of this stuff? Like, how are we getting his story? And I was like, we're getting his story because he was so lucky. He is that 1 in a million. He is that like lottery winner that you hear the story of. You know, it required all of these crazy breaks for anyone to survive this situation.
The only reason the character basically survives in the film is because he has a number of friends who happen to be sympathetic and, you know, capable. So the first lucky break he catches is he gets pulled away from his family as he's getting boarded onto the train.
Because he's friends with the policeman.
He's friends with the Jewish policeman guy. And then his other lucky break is that he knows this woman who he knows would house him.
Yeah.
And then his other lucky break is that woman knows another family who can then house him when they get rumbled. Right? So he just catches all these breaks, and the film. What I guess an incredibly cynical person could maybe accuse this of like being like just pure like misery porn, where it's just like lingering on it, right? But I think the film does a really good job of avoiding that, because instead of focusing, because obviously it's a Holocaust film, it's gonna have that like misery and like you're gonna be sitting there watching like, oh fucking hell, like this is just fucked. But it sort of becomes, as the film progresses, like a sort of survival film. Like a sort of, not horror, but this sort of like dystopian survival film where he's like walking through the rubble of Warsaw, and it's sort of, I don't know.
And it's, I think that's something that left a huge impression on me as well, was how amazing the set design was, and that intense transformation of the cityscape into a hellish dystopia. Like,
because you see it change.
And what's interesting is, you know, as a kid I was always more drawn to sci-fi and kind of, you know, the fantastical kinds of fiction that would depict these awful things, and you always felt this sort of safety in the separation from reality. And it's as I've grown up and become more acquainted with history and historical fiction that you realise how much all of that stuff mirrors reality. And that sounds like an obvious kind of observation, but and it's something I obviously understood before watching this film, but there's just something different when it's like so raw in its representation of it. Like, I felt this scale in a way that sometimes, you know, you watch a horror film, right? And things will happen in it that you will mildly scare you, but you won't feel the same kind of terror as the person in the film. But then you could have a dream in which all of those exact same things happen and you're in that moment, and that terror in that moment in your dream can be incredibly palpable. It can feel like so disorienting and like lucid and bizarre. And this film had a little whiff of that, where I felt this scale of the destruction and like the kind of oppressive nature of like his hopeless struggle against the war machine.
Because the sense of realism is so strong in the film. Because the actual violence in the film is pretty limited for the most part, outside of people sort of being oppressed. There are a few moments that it's almost kind of voyeuristic. The one bit of violence I could think of is like where he's in the apartment, and he sees the Jewish rebellion,
happening in the street below him, and so you're kind of getting to see a lot of the violence from afar. And there's another bit where he sees it before everything's gone totally awful, when he's with his family and they see people, like a family getting randomly like the grandparent getting pushed out of the window because he can't stand up and stuff like that. So you kind of get this weird voyeuristic sense of violence rather than direct.
And the way the camera does it as well, it's like a very cold. The way it's sort of all like observed, and it's sort of, they're all done in these like long, like sort of takes with all these like crazy. I don't know how he did it. Because you sort of have like this, particularly the Jewish rebellion scene where he's like looking outside, and like you have this like people getting blown up and like falling off. It's just this sort of distant, cold shot with like no panning or anything. It's just like, you know, like him sort of putting you firmly in the character's perspective, right? It just has a kind of different vibe / atmosphere, whatever you want to call it. This film's, because I guess the obvious comparison to this film would be Schindler's List, which I don't know if I would even say, you know, I prefer one or the other. I think both are pretty much, you know, just incredible films. But I think this offers maybe Schindler's List is better for different reasons. It's like it's more like character focused. It's more dramatic. It's a bit more,
and it kind of exists on. I mean, I have limited knowledge about it, but it kind of exists on the flip side of a kind of man looking in to try and save. People.
Yes. It's sort of a little bit more. I don't know. It's more it's more sort of mainstream. It's not. I'm trying to avoid saying that it's softed edges, because it's not. And it does, sort of. I think does a pretty good job of sort of showing the horror of it all pretty succinctly and effectively. But this film is almost. It's so cold.
Yes.
What it does have has a heart and all of that, but
it has a brutality in just how kind of plain and bare bones what you're being presented with is. There's no sugarcoating involved.
Yeah, of course. And I think maybe that might partially literally just come down to the fact that Polanski literally lived through the Holocaust as a child. Like, this film is almost based on a real story, but it's almost partially based. It's like semi-autobiographical.
On his experiences, yeah.
And because he had these crazy, like, he escaped from a Holocaust camp, so like. That's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah. It's insane to get that kind of perspective as well. Like, we have blessedly existed in a kind of time and space that's so separate from it. Yeah. And kind of realizing that was like not just recent history, but where people are still sort of telling those stories. Again, this sounds like very obvious kind of observations, but I don't know. There's just kind of an impact that kind of a simple realization can have on you, and a story told simply, but by someone who really experienced it, just has
get those details.
It just has a certain grip and a certain specificity to it that you can't get anywhere else.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to pick. Like, I don't know if I have like a favorite moment in the film, but I mean, like the go-to one is the piano scene, right? Where he encounters the Nazi.
Oh, yes.
And he plays the piano. I mean, that is the famous scene.
That is amazing.
Yeah, which is
that the famous scene?
Pretty much, yeah. I think that is pretty much sort of like the iconic scene of the film.
That's so beautiful to me. And I really loved that whole sort of ending bit as well, where he just so happens to encounter this one Nazi who has some level of human empathy to him. But it's also kind of bizarre. You still don't really understand the motivations of the man. There's this kind of understanding you
never really know what he wants.
There's an implication towards the end that his niceness is coming out of a kind of understanding that the war is basically lost, and that things will return to some level of normality afterwards, because then they encounter that man later and then he's been captured and he's kind of like, I saved this one man, I helped. I like it because it doesn't do it then kind does characterizes the Nazis, or at least some of them, as like real human beings, which I think we've discussed we did a podcast a while ago on Downfall, another very important film about World War II. We discuss in that how important it is to remember to characterize bad people in history as real people, because of the lessons we can learn about ourselves and our own state and culture through the mistakes and the awful things that other people did back in time.
Well, I also think that through dehumanizing the Nazis to such a ridiculous extent, you can sort of give them this sort of enigmatic power.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is, I think, important to show that they were actually just human beings.
To lazily quote Harry Potter of all things, fear of the name only increases fear of the thing itself.
Sort of, yeah. Because I mean, like the one, I think I'm sort of repeating what I said from Downfall here, but I'll just sort of go over it again because it's relevant again here, which is that there's this long-standing view in sort of pop culture with the Nazis as being these like coldly efficient, sort of omnipotent demons that sort of
they're monsters,
strolled through
they're not
Europe.
People.
But it's more that you're really empowering them by saying that, right? Because in many, many, many ways, the Nazis were massively incompetent and fucked up all the time, and were only coldly efficient, in certain things. I mean, unfortunately, the Holocaust is an example of something that they were pretty coldly efficient at. But you can look at, particularly Downfall sort of talks about, the Nazi leadership and how fucking weird degenerates.
They were all weird. Yeah, they were all on drugs. They were all kind of
weird sexual perversions.
They were all stressed out of their mind, completely seemingly clueless.
Yeah, living in this like fancy land with the Jews as this big bad, and the communists as this other big bad, and they were they were just like a demented, tyrannical regime. You know, that's kind of what it is. And it is sort of. This film does offer that as well.
It offers a little flavour of it. It's obviously not the crucial focus.
But it never shies away from ever sort of down. It never even goes close to downplaying it.
No.
That's the important line you've got to ride. Which I think, Downfall is sort of riding a much tighter, road.
I guess so.
Oh, I've got to. You
have to be
really
much more
pull
careful
that
with that one. Yeah. Which I think they do.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you haven't watched Downfall, or if you have and you're interested in our review of that, please do check that out. It's on the channel, and a fantastic film for any of you that are interested in the kind of a perspective from the other side of from the German side of the war, and just kind of seeing Hitler lose his mind, and
like in the meme.
Yes. Yeah, it's very satisfying watching a film fundamentally where Hitler loses the war. If you just want to watch it on those terms, like Hitler just goes more and more insane, loses the war.
There is a level of satisfaction to that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but this film is not so much satisfying as much as it is you're sort of relieved at the end. You're like, oh my God. But there's that sort of constant, even at the end, where he's playing the piano, the sort of the sadness of it is that, like we said earlier, he was the lucky one.
Yeah.
In the most fucked up way possible.
Yeah.
He got super lucky.
That cut when he's just playing the piano again in the
over the credits,
and or the bit where because it cuts and he's back in the radio room, isn't he?
Yeah.
That was just heartbreaking. It was such a simple image of just his face, but some back in a familiar location.
Yeah.
But and it's almost an identical shot to what we see at the very beginning of the film. But our understanding of what's happened to this man in that time, just you could have that single frame of just his face playing the piano, and it just means so much more, and it's so much more, it's so much darker and more tragic. And it's so simple in all it shows you. And I think there's a real majesty to that kind of craft. Being able to evoke with something so simple is such an amazing feat of filmmaking in my mind.
I just think I don't have much more to say other than it's basically just say what you will about Polanski, and
you have plenty of right to say that.
And I have said it in this review, but my God, he just directs the shit out of this film. It is just so beautifully made. Like you said, the mise en scène, the production design is just all just perfect. Everything is so disgusting and grotty when it needs to be. Everything feels very authentic. I love the focus on little details, the stuff where he's in that sort of final snowy house and he's moving around, and the whole thing is about him just trying to open a can. That kind of detail is just I think really beautiful. And it just all the costume design, everything about the film just looks stunning and disgusting when it needs to be, and sort of grim and gritty. I just he might be a child molester.
And he is.
And he is a child molester. However, he can shoot a film. So,
he can.
Make of that what you will. If that's a line that you draw, I'd have no problem with that if you don't want to watch Polanski films. But, I quite, it's a good film.
The film stands on it.
For itself.
For us, at least, we feel able to separate those two things, and we respect if you aren't able to. At least I do. Don't know about you.
I guess particularly with this film, I think if you're a big anti-Polanski person, I think fair enough. But I do think the fact, I don't know how many films there are out there about the Holocaust from someone who actually lived through the Holocaust. I do think maybe you should consider overriding it just to get that. But if you don't,
we're not going to force anyone to. But if you have seen this film and you've enjoyed it, or you have any thoughts on it, please let us know. Same for The Apartment. How would you rate this?
It's like a 9 or a 10. I just couldn't figure it out. But yeah, one of those. I'm feeling an 8 or a 9. And that's probably because, as my first experience with the film, it met all of my expectations. But the more we've discussed about it now, the more I feel my love for it and appreciation for it increasing. So it's definitely something I want to return to. What I'd say is, we were talking earlier about comparing it to Schindler's List. I think Schindler's List will have a more immediate impact, but because it's a lot more sort of intensely emotional type of film. And I think Schindler's List did win Best Picture, right? So we'll come to that.
Probably, yeah.
But it definitely did now that I think about it. But this film is not as grabbing but there's a sort of subtlety and detail to it that I don't think there's not really many other films that even offer it. You know, in this context, the only thing I could think of is. No, really, in this realism, I can't think of anything that's even close to it. I was going to say Come and See, but even that is kind of has this bizarre atmosphere to it, whereas this is just
That's
very
more like
cold
esoteric,
and realistic.
isn't it?
A little bit, yeah. It has a kind of strange vibe, whereas this just feels very realistic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you have any recommendations down in the comments for things that you think match this in terms of vibe, we would be very interested in checking those out. Increase our film knowledge. We're always open to that.
Sure.
I think that basically wraps up this rekindling of the podcast.
Sure.
I think before we close off, shall we do a spin wheel for next time?
Oh,
So, if you have watched this far, thank you very much for a start. And you get to a little sneak peek into what next podcast
I do still have it.
will be about.
Right, I'm spinning.
Let's do it.
Right, so next time we are watching The Sound of Music.
Okay, I've seen The Sound of Music. Have you
I
seen?
haven't seen The Sound of
Okay,
Music. So
hey,
there's
there we go.
one you've seen. Okay, what's the second one? Do you want to...
I will spin it. Disagree with that.
The moment I point at you, it wants cookies.
Okay. Oh my god.
You're breaking my phone, mate.
Or are we going back in time?
What's it going to be?
No, The Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, shit. Well, that's two bangers, really.
Two bangers.
Oh, man. We've both seen Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Okay.
That's going to be a corker. I'm happy to
Excellent
rewatch
stuff.
that pretty much any time.
If you enjoyed this video, this podcast, please consider liking and subscribing if you're watching it on YouTube. If you're listening to it on Spotify, Apple, whatever podcast thing you are listening to it on, please consider following, rating it 5 stars if you have that option, and checking us out on YouTube if you are not watching us on there. I have been Adam.
I've been Rupert.
We've been Internally Screening. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Peace.
Peace.